Have you ever wondered who the real masterminds behind American independence were? Well, in this video, we're going to be doing an in-depth exploration of the American Revolution. American Revolution 1765-1783. Hey everyone, welcome back to Prospect Everything. Today, we're going to be talking about the American Revolution. This was a time of great change and upheaval in the early history of the United States. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video for more historical content like this. The American Revolution was an insurrection carried out by 13 of Great Britain's North American colonies that began in 1775 and ended with a peace treaty in 1783. The colonies won political independence and went on to form the United States of America. The war followed more than a decade of growing estrangement between the British Crown and a large and influential segment of its North American colonies, that was caused by British attempts to assert greater control over colonial affairs after having long adhered to a policy of salutary neglect. Until early in 1778, the conflict was a civil war within the British Empire, but afterward it became an international war as France in 1778 and Spain in 1779 joined the colonies against Britain. Meanwhile, the Netherlands, which provided both official recognition of the United States and financial support for it, was engaged in its own war against Britain. From the beginning, sea power was vital in determining the course of the war, lending to British strategy a flexibility that helped compensate for the comparatively small number of troops sent to America and ultimately enabling the French to help bring out the final British surrender at Yorktown in 1781. The American colonies fought the war on land with essentially two types of organization: the Continental National Army and the state militias. The total number of the former provided by quotas from the states throughout the conflict was 231,771 soldiers, and the militias totaled 164,087. At any given time, however, the American forces seldom numbered over 20,000. In 1781, there were only about 29,000 insurgent under arms throughout the country. The war was therefore one fought by small field armies. Militias, poorly disciplined and with elected officers, were summoned for periods usually not exceeding 3 months. The terms of Continental Army service were only gradually increased from 1 to 3 years, and not even bounties, and the offer of land kept the army up to strength. Reasons for the difficulty in maintaining an adequate continental force included the colonists' traditional antipathy toward regular armies, the objections of farmers to being away from their fields, the competition of the states with the Continental Congress to keep men in the militia, and the wretched and uncertain pay in a period of inflation. By contrast, the British Army was a reliable, steady force of professionals. Since it numbered only about 42,000, heavy recruiting programs were introduced. Many of the enlisted men were farm boys, as were most of the Americans, while others came from cities where they had been unable to find work. Still, others joined the army to escape fines or imprisonment. The great majority became efficient soldiers as a result of sound training and ferocious discipline. The officers were drawn largely from the gentry and the aristocracy and obtained their commissions and promotions by purchase. Though they received no formal training, they were not so dependent on a book knowledge for military tactics, as were many of the Americans. British generals, however, tended toward a lack of imagination and initiative, while those who demonstrated such qualities often were rash. Because troops were few and conscription unknown, the British government, following a traditional policy, purchased about 30,000 troops from various German princes. The Landgrave of Hesse, furnished approximately 3/5 of that total. Few acts by the crown roused so much antagonism in America as that use of foreign mercenaries. The colony of Massachusetts was seen by King George III and his ministers as the hotbed of disloyalty. After the Boston Tea Party, December 16, 1773, Parliament responded with the Intolerable Acts 1774, a series of punitive measures that were intended to cow the restive population into obedience. The 1691 Charter of the Massachusetts Bay Colony was abrogated, and the colony's elected ruling council was replaced with a military government under General Thomas Gage, the commander of all British troops in North America. At Gage's headquarters in Boston, he had 4 regiments, perhaps 4,000 troops, under his command, and Parliament deemed that force sufficient to overawe the population in his vicinity. Gage, for his part, thought that no fewer than 20,000 troops would be adequate for such an endeavor, but he acted with the forces he had at hand. Beginning in the late summer of 1774, Gage attempted to suppress the warlike preparations throughout New England by seizing stores of weapons and powder. Although the colonials were initially taken by surprise, they soon mobilized. Groups such as the Sons of Liberty uncovered advanced details of British actions, and committees of correspondence aided in the organization of countermeasures. Learning of a British plan to secure the weapons cache at Fort William and Mary, an undermanned army outpost in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Boston's Committee of Correspondence dispatched Paul Revere on December 13, 1774, to issue a warning to local allies. The following day, several hundred soldiers assembled and stormed the fort, captured the 6-man garrison, seizing a significant quantity of powder, and striking the British colors. A subsequent party removed the remaining cannons and small arms. That act of open violence against the crown infuriated British officials, but their attempts to deprive the incipient rebellion of vital war material over the following months were increasingly frustrated by colonial leaders who denuded British supply caches and sequestered arms and ammunition in private homes. On April 14, 1775, Gage had received a letter from Dartmouth informing him that Massachusetts had been declared to be in a state of open revolt and ordering him to arrest and imprison the principal actors and abettors in the Massachusetts Provincial Congress. Gage had received his orders, but the colonials were well aware of his intentions before he could act. On April 16, Revere rode to Concord, a town 20 miles, 32 kilometers northwest of Boston, to advise local compatriots to secure their military stores in advance of British troop movement. 2 nights later, Revere wrote from Charlestown, where he confirmed that the local Sons of Liberty had seen the 2 lanterns that were posted in Boston's Old North Church, signaling a British approach across the Charles River to Lexington to warn that the British were on the march. Revolutionary leaders John Hancock and Samuel Adams fled Lexington to safety, and Revere was joined by fellow riders William Dawes and Samuel Prescott. The trio were apprehended outside Lexington by a British patrol, but Prescott escaped custody and was able to continue on to Concord. Revere's midnight ride provided the colonists with vital information about British intentions, and it was later immortalized in a poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Some 700 British troops spent the evening of April 18, 1775, forming ranks on Boston Common with orders to seize the colonial army at Concord. The lengthy public display ensured that Gage had lost any chance at secrecy, and by the time the force had been transported across the Charles River to Cambridge, it was 2 a.m. the following morning. The march to Lexington was an exercise in misery. It began in a swamp, and the British were forced to wade through brackish water that was in places waist deep. By the time the soaked infantry members arrived in Lexington about 5 a.m., 77 Minutemen were among those who had assembled on the village green. Officers on both sides ordered their troops to hold their positions but not to fire their weapons. It is unclear who fired the shot heard round the world, but it sparked a skirmish that left 8 Americans dead. The colonial force evaporated, and the British moved on to Concord, where they were met with determined resistance from hundreds of militia members. Now outnumbered and running low on ammunition, the British column was forced to retire to Boston. On the return march, American snipers took a deadly toll on the British, and only the timely arrival of 1,100 reinforcements prevented the retreat from becoming a rout. Those killed and wounded at the battles of Lexington and Concord numbered 273 British and 95 Americans. Rebel militia then converged on Boston from all over New England, while London attempted to formulate a response. Generals Sir William Howe, Sir Henry Clinton, and John Burgoyne were dispatched at once with reinforcements, and Charles Cornwallis followed later. Those 4 commanders would be identified with the conduct of the principal British operations. The Continental Congress in Philadelphia, acting for the 13 colonies, voted for general defensive measures, called out troops, and appointed George Washington of Virginia commander-in-chief. Before Washington could take charge of the 15,000 colonial troops laying siege to the British garrison in Boston, Gage ordered Howe to drive the Americans from the heights in Charlestown. The Americans provoked the assault by entrenching on Breed's Hill, the lower of 2 hills overlooking the British position. The placement of American artillery on the heights would have made the British position in Boston untenable. So, on June 17, 1775, Howe led a British frontal assault on the American fortifications. In the misleadingly named Battle of Bunker Hill, Breed's Hill was the primary locus of combat. Howe's 2,300 troops encountered withering fire while storming the rebel lines. The British eventually cleared the hill, but at the cost of more than 40% of the assault force, and the battle was a moral victory for the Americans. Washington takes command on July 3, 1775. Washington assumed command of the American forces at Cambridge. Not only did he have to contain the British in Boston, but he also had to recruit a continental army. During the winter of 1775-1776, recruitment lagged so badly that fresh drafts of militia were called up to help maintain the siege. The balance shifted in late winter when General Henry Knox arrived with artillery from Fort Ticonderoga in New York. The British fort, which occupied a strategic point between Lake George and Lake Champlain, had been surprised and taken on May 10, 1775 by the Green Mountain Boys, a Vermont militia group under the command of Colonel Ethan Allen. The cannons from Ticonderoga were mounted on Dorchester Heights above Boston. The guns forced Howe, who had replaced Gage in command in October 1775, to evacuate the city on March 17, 1776. Howe then repaired to Halifax to prepare for an invasion of New York, and Washington moved units southward for its defense. Meanwhile, action flared in the north. In the fall of 1775, the Americans invaded Canada. One force under General Richard Montgomery captured Montreal on November 13. Another force under Benedict Arnold made a remarkable march through the Maine wilderness to Quebec. Unable to take the city, Arnold was joined by Montgomery, many of whose troops had gone home because their enlistments had expired. An attack on the city on the last day of the year failed, Montgomery was killed, and many troops were captured. The Americans maintained a siege of the city but withdrew with the arrival of British reinforcements in the spring. Pursued by the British and decimated by smallpox, the Americans fell back to Ticonderoga. British General Guy Carleton's hopes of moving quickly down Lake Champlain, however, were frustrated by Arnold's construction of a fighting fleet. Forced to build one of his own, Carleton destroyed most of the American fleet in October 1776, but considered the season too advanced to bring Ticonderoga under siege. As the Americans suffered defeat in Canada, so did the British in the South. North Carolina Patriots trounced a body of Loyalists at Moore's Creek Bridge on February 27, 1776. Charleston, South Carolina was successfully defended against a British assault by sea in June. Having made up its mind to crush the rebellion, the British government sent General Howe and his brother Richard Admiral Lord Howe with a large fleet and 34,000 British and German troops to New York. It also gave the House a commission to treat with the Americans. The British force sailed on June 10, 1776 from Halifax to New York and on July 5 encamped on Staten Island. The Continental Congress, which had proclaimed the independence of the colonies, at first thought that the House were empowered to negotiate peace terms but discovered that they were authorized only to accept submission and assure pardons. Their peace efforts getting nowhere, the House turned to force. Washington, who had anticipated British designs, had already marched from Boston to New York and fortified the city, but his position was far from ideal. His left flank was thrown across the East River, beyond the village of Brooklyn, while the remainder of his lines fronted the Hudson River, making them open to a combined naval and ground attack. The position was untenable since the British absolutely dominated the waters about Manhattan. Howe drove Washington out of New York and forced the abandonment of the whole of Manhattan Island by employing three well-directed movements upon the American left. On August 22, 1776, under his brother's guns, General Howe crossed the Narrows to the Long Island shore with 15,000 troops, increasing the number to 20,000 on the 25th. He then scored a smashing victory on August 27, driving the Americans into their Brooklyn works and inflicting a loss of about 1,400 troops. Washington skillfully evacuated his army from Brooklyn to Manhattan that night under cover of a fog. On September 15, Howe followed up his victory by invading Manhattan. Though checked at Harlem Heights the next day, he drew Washington off the island in October by a move to Throgs Neck and then to New Rochelle, northeast of the city. Leaving garrisons at Fort Washington on Manhattan and at Fort Lee on the opposite shore of the Hudson River, Washington hastened to block Howe. The British commander, however, defeated him on October 28 at Chatterton Hill near White Plains. Howe slipped between the American army and Fort Washington and stormed the fort on November 16, seizing guns, supplies, and nearly 3,000 prisoners. British forces under Lord Cornwallis then took Fort Lee and on November 24 started to drive the American army across New Jersey. Though Washington escaped to the west bank of the Delaware River, his army nearly disappeared. Howe then put his army into winter quarters, with outposts at towns such as Bordertown and Trenton. On Christmas night, Washington struck back with a brilliant riposte. Crossing the ice-strewn Delaware with 2,400 troops, he fell upon the Hessian garrison at Trenton at dawn and took nearly 1,000 prisoners. Though almost trapped by Cornwallis, who recovered Trenton on January 2, 1777, Washington made a skillful escape during the night, won a battle against British reinforcements at Princeton the next day, and went into winter quarters in the defensible area around Morristown. The Trenton-Princeton campaign roused the country and saved the struggle for independence from collapse. Britain's strategy in 1777 aimed at driving a wedge between New England and other colonies. An army under General John Burgoyne was to march south from Canada and join forces with Howe on the Hudson. But Howe seems to have concluded that Burgoyne was strong enough to operate on his own, and left New York in the summer, taking his army by sea to the head of Chesapeake Bay. Once ashore, Howe defeated Washington badly but not decisively at Brandywine Creek on September 11. Then, fainting westward, Howe entered Philadelphia, the American capital, on September 25. The Continental Congress fled to York. Washington struck back at Germantown on October 4, but, compelled to withdraw, went into winter quarters at Valley Forge. In the north, the story was different. Burgoyne was to move south to Albany with a force of about 9,000 British, Germans, indigenous people, and American loyalists. A smaller force under Lieutenant Colonel Barry St. Leger was to converge on Albany through the Mohawk Valley. Burgoyne took Ticonderoga handily on July 5 and then, instead of using Lake George, chose a southward route by land. Slowed by the rugged terrain, strewn with trees cut down by Americans under General Philip Schuyler, and needing horses, Burgoyne sent a force of Germans to collect them at Bennington, Vermont. The Germans were nearly wiped out on August 16 by New Englanders under General John Stark and Colonel Seth Warner. Meanwhile, St. Leger besieged Fort Schuyler, present-day Rome, New York, ambushed a relief column of American militia at Oriskany on August 6, but retreated as his forces gave up the siege and American troops under Arnold approached. Burgoyne himself reached the Hudson, but the Americans, now under General Horatio Gates, checked him at Freeman's Farm on September 19 and, thanks to Arnold's battlefield leadership, decisively defeated him at Bemis Heights on October 7. 10 days later, unable to get help from New York, Burgoyne surrendered at Saratoga. The most significant result of Burgoyne's capitulation was the entrance of France into the war. The French had secretly furnished financial and material aid to the Americans since 1776. Now they prepared fleets and armies, although they did not formally declare war until June 1778. After a hungry winter at Valley Forge, meanwhile, the Americans at Valley Forge survived the hungry winter of 1777-1778, which was made worse by quartermaster and commissary mismanagement, graft of contractors, and unwillingness of farmers to sell produce for paper money. Order and discipline among the troops were improved by the arrival of the Freiherr von Steuben, a Prussian officer in the service of France. Steuben instituted a training program in which he emphasized drilling by officers, marching in column, and using firearms more effectively. The program paid off at Monmouth Courthouse, New Jersey on June 28, 1778, when Washington attacked the British, who were withdrawing from Philadelphia to New York. Although Sir Henry Clinton, who had replaced Howe, struck back harder, the Americans stood their ground, as exemplified by Molly Pitcher, whose legend as the heroine of the battle spread afterward. Thereafter, except in the winter of 1779, which was spent at Morristown, Washington made his headquarters at West Point on the Hudson, and Clinton avowed himself too weak to attack him there. French aid now materialized with the appearance of a strong fleet under the Comte d'Estaing. Unable to enter New York harbor, d'Estaing tried to assist Major General John Sullivan in dislodging the British from Newport, Rhode Island. Storms and British reinforcements thwarted the joint effort. Setbacks in the North action in the North was largely a stalemate for the rest of the war. The British raided New Bedford, Massachusetts, and New Haven and New London, Connecticut, while Loyalists and indigenous forces attacked settlements in New York and Pennsylvania. The Americans under Mad Anthony Wayne stormed Stony Point, New York on July 16, 1779, and Light Horse Harry Lee took Paulus Hook, New Jersey on August 19. More lasting in effect was Sullivan's expedition of August 1779 against Britain's indigenous allies in New York, particularly the destruction of their villages and fields of corn. Farther west, Colonel George Rogers Clark campaigned against British posts on the northwest frontier. With a company of volunteers, Clark captured Kaskaskia, the chief post in the Illinois country, on July 4, 1778, and later secured the submission of Vincennes. The latter was recaptured by General Henry Hamilton, the British commander at Detroit, but in the spring of 1779, Clark raised another force and retook Vincennes from Hamilton. That expedition did much to free the frontier from raids by indigenous people, gave American settlers a hold upon the Northwest, and encouraged expansion into the Ohio Valley. Potentially serious blows to the American cause were Benedict Arnold's efforts to surrender his army post to the British in 1780 and the army mutinies of 1780 and 1781. Arnold's attempt to betray West Point miscarried, and his British contact, Major John Andre, was captured by the Americans and hanged as a spy. Mutinies were sparked by misunderstandings over terms of enlistment, poor food and clothing, gross arrears of pay, and the decline in the purchasing power of the dollar. Suppressed by force or negotiation, the mutinies shook the morale of the army. British strategy since 1778 had called for offensives that were designed to take advantage of the flexibility of sea power and the loyalist sentiment of many of the people. British forces from New York and St. Augustine, Florida, occupied Georgia by the end of January 1779. General Augustine Prevost, who had commanded in Florida, made Savannah his headquarters and defended the city in the fall against d'Estaing and a Franco-American army. Rabia Kazimierz Pulaski, a Polish officer who was serving on the American side, was mortally wounded in an unsuccessful assault on Savannah on October 9, 1779. Having failed to achieve any decisive advantage in the North in 1779, Clinton headed a combined military and naval expedition southward. He evacuated Newport on October 25, left New York under the command of German General Wilhelm Freiherr von Kniphausen, and in December sailed with some 8,500 soldiers to join Prevost in Savannah. Cornwallis accompanied him, and later Lord Rawdon joined him with an additional force. Marching on Charleston, Clinton cut off the city from relief and, after a brief siege, compelled General Benjamin Lincoln to surrender on May 12, 1780. The loss of Charleston and the 5,000 troops of its garrison, virtually the entire Continental Army in the South, was a serious blow to the American cause. Learning that Newport was threatened by a French expeditionary force under the Comte de Rochambeau, Clinton returned to New York in June, leaving Cornwallis at Charleston. Cornwallis, however, took the offensive. On August 16, he shattered General Gates's army at Camden, South Carolina, and German Continental Army officer Johann Kahl was mortally wounded in the fighting. The destruction of a force of loyalists at Kings Mountain on October 7 led Cornwallis to move against the new American commander, General Nathanael Greene. When Greene put part of his force under General Daniel Morgan, Cornwallis sent his cavalry leader, Colonel Banastre Tarleton, after Morgan. At Cowpens on January 17, 1781, Morgan destroyed practically all of Tarleton's column. Subsequently, on March 15, Greene and Cornwallis fought at Guilford Courthouse, North Carolina. Cornwallis won but suffered heavy casualties. After withdrawing to Wilmington, he had marched into Virginia to join British forces sent there by Clinton. Greene then moved back to South Carolina, where he was defeated by Rawdon at Hobkirk's Hill on April 25 and at 96 in June, and by Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Stewart at Eutaw Springs on September 8. In spite of that, the British, harassed by partisan leaders such as Francis Marion, whose guerrilla tactics earned him the nickname the Swamp Fox, Thomas Sumter and Andrew Pickens, soon retired to the coast and remained locked up in Charleston and Savannah. Meanwhile, Cornwallis entered Virginia, reaching Petersburg on May 20, 1781. Sending Tarleton on raids across the colony, the British asserted a sphere of control as far north as Fredericksburg and west to Charlottesville. There, Thomas Jefferson, then the governor of Virginia, barely escaped capture by Tarleton's troops. Cornwallis started to build a base at Yorktown, at the same time fending off American forces under Wayne, Steuben, and the Marquis de Lafayette. Learning that the Comte de Grasse had arrived in the Chesapeake with a large fleet and 3,000 French troops, Washington and Rochambeau moved south to Virginia. By mid-September, the Franco-American forces had placed Yorktown under siege, and British rescue efforts proved fruitless. Cornwallis surrendered his army of more than 7,000 soldiers on October 19, 1781. For the second time during the war, the British had lost an entire army. Thereafter, land action in America died out, though the war persisted in other theaters and on the high seas. Eventually, Clinton was replaced by Sir Guy Carleton. While the peace treaties were under consideration and afterward, Carleton evacuated thousands of loyalists from America, including many from Savannah on July 11, 1782, and others from Charleston on December 14. The last British forces finally left New York on November 25, 1783. Washington then re-entered the city in triumph. In explaining the outcome of the war, scholars have pointed out that the British never contrived an overall general strategy for winning it. Also, even if the war could have been terminated by British power in the early stages, the generals during that period, notably Howe, declined to make a prompt, vigorous, intelligent application of that power. They acted, to be sure, within the conventions of their age, but in choosing to take minimal risks. For example, Carleton and Ticonderoga and Howe at Brooklyn Heights and later in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. They lost the opportunity to deal potentially mortal blows to the rebellion. There was also a grave lack of understanding and cooperation at crucial moments, as with Burgoyne and Howe in 1777. Finally, the British counted too strongly on loyalist support they did not receive. But British mistakes alone could not account for the success of the United States. Feeble as their war effort occasionally became, The Americans were able generally to take advantage of their enemy's mistake. The Continental Army, moreover, was by no means an inept force even before Steuben's reforms. The militias, while usually unreliable, could perform admirably under leaders who understood them, such as Arnold, Greene, and Morgan, and often reinforced the Continentals in crisis. Furthermore, Washington, a rock in adversity, learned slowly but reasonably well the art of generalship. The supplies and funds furnished by France from 1776 to 1778 were invaluable, while French military and naval support after 1778 was essential. The outcome, therefore, resulted from a combination of British blunders, American efforts, and French assistance. And that wraps up our exploration of the American Revolution. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more videos like this. Until next time.